Hey guys, and welcome to the new episode of Full Throttle, and today we are going to talk about one very new and very interesting class of vehicles. Those are the SUV coupes, and we'll show you one of the newest and the most interesting ones. This is the new Mercedes GLE coupe in the 400D version. But before we get into this car, we must talk about this new class, the SUV coupes. Of course, all these cars actually have 4 doors and are not coupes at all, but they have this swooped roofline in the back and they do look sportier and aggressive, and at least compared to the regular SUV options. Now, many people like them and they are very popular on Instagram and the young people love them.
Hey, trust me, I hear what you're saying, but I like it's new what you're telling me. I'm curious.
On the other hand, automotive journalists really hate them, but I guess that's the natural order of things.
It's not particularly beautiful, it's not particularly useful. Remind you of anything?
Now, the first generations of these cars were very ugly indeed, but now the manufacturers have gotten into the design a bit more, and the new ones are looking quite decent and are even more practical than the first versions. So, in case you're wondering if you should get this car or the regular GLE, it's all a matter of personal preference, but at least to me this car looks better and more interesting than the regular version. Now let's see what the GLE coupe is all about. As you can see, the car definitely has 4 doors, but the difference between this one and the regular GLE is the sloped roofline here in the back. Now, as you can see, the car does look sportier and of course it's less practical. You cannot get this version with 7 seats unlike the regular GLE, and you get less headroom in the back and of course a smaller boot. But those are the sacrifices you have to make if you want this stylish piece of luxury and aggressive German SUV. Now let's see how this Mercedes GLE coupe is like to drive, and if I have to use one word to describe the driving experience, I would say it's very pleasant and relaxing. Even though this car is very big, you don't really get that sense when you're driving it. You get a very light steering, the car is easy to maneuver, very well placed on the road, and thanks to the super soft air suspension you can go over absolutely anything on the road without any trouble. Overall, it's really a pleasant car to drive. There is not much sportiness to it, unlike the BMW X6, but Mercedes knows its clients and that they're not so much into driving fast and more into driving relaxing. Now, that doesn't mean that the GLE coupe cannot handle some turns. On the contrary, the car is actually pretty well placed on the road, and even in this diesel version, which is not an AMG, you get a pretty solid suspension setup and the body roll on the turns isn't that bad. Of course, the steering gets a little bit firmer in the sport suspension and the suspensions drop the car lower, which means it handles better. There isn't a dramatic difference, but the ride gets a little harsher, and if you want to have some fun with the car on the back roads, you definitely can do it. But that's not something that the car really enjoys, and you can feel that. It's a car that's meant to be driven in a more relaxed manner. And let's talk about the engine. The diesels are not a very popular choice right now, but I think this 3-liter 6-cylinder diesel very well suits the whole character of the car. It's smooth, but when you press the accelerator, the car actually has a lot of power and grunt thanks to the torque. And overall, it doesn't sound bad at all. You don't get any rattle inside the interior, and you get a pleasant sound which doesn't really sound like a diesel. Overall, you get better fuel economy, but at the same time it's not as smooth as the petrol option you can get. If I have to choose between this one and the petrol version, I would definitely go for the petrol, because there you get the mild hybrid system which makes the whole car be smoother and eliminates all turbo lag, because with this engine you definitely get some turbo lag, which is inevitable for a big turbo diesel engine. And something else I would like to say about driving this car is that yes, there is so much technology, but at some moment you definitely get overwhelmed by it the first time you step in. For example, here on the digital cluster there are just so many things displayed at the same time that I don't even know what they say. There are some circles, other shapes, you get some random numbers. There are just like a million of customizable options on the displays here, and you even get this system right here that displays another million million things. I know that Mercedes system isn't the most simple one, but you definitely do need some time to get used to it and see what is where. For example, in the BMW models, you definitely get a more simple approach, which I honestly prefer because here I just don't know where to look at and there is just so much information displayed that it makes you a disservice rather than helping you while you're driving. And when I'm saying that the technology can be overwhelming, I just want to show you this. Now this is the digital cluster, which looks all nice, and here for example you have many options. You can see how many degrees the car is tilted, which can be somewhat useful. But look at this, you can change the left dial to be an actual analog clock, and why would you need that when you get a clock right here and right here on the dash? But it gets even worse. Now you can change the middle part to give you some sort of radar, which is your concentration level, and you can actually change the right one to show you other things. You can see, for example, how much your suspension is lifted, what angle are the tires leveled. You can see so many fancy graphics like a G-force meter, and trust me, this is stuff that nobody will ever use. And you also get those ridiculous modes which give you vitality, and when you press them, the car actually gives you these graphics and plays some ridiculous music. And trust me, when someone is ever going to use that mode in real life? Now, Instagram influencers, mob bosses and famous people love these cars, and there is a good reason for that. Everything about the GLE Coupe says, look at me, you have this metal grille here that shines in the dark, you get the Mercedes-Benz badge, which is even bigger than my hand, but of course that's because all the radars are integrated here, and that's definitely a more aesthetically pleasing solution than what BMW does, which is to just slap an enormous piece of plastic right here on the grille. Overall, everything about the GLE Coupe is just massive. The whole car is super wide, the headlights are big, and these AMG bumpers here are very nice looking, and you get this sharp metal effect thanks to the silver. Overall, I wouldn't really call this car beautiful by any means, but it definitely looks menacing, aggressive and dominating, which I think is kind of its point. Now, on the side of the GLE Coupe, definitely the most interesting thing is that swooped roofline you get here, which is the major difference between this model and the regular GLE. Now, which one do you guys prefer? Please write down in the comments below. I personally think that the Coupe looks more interesting and sportier, even though the cars are basically the same, and there is nothing really sporty about the Coupe that you won't get in the regular GLE. Overall, I think Mercedes has done a pretty good job designing this car, and it definitely looks better than the first generation, and I think it kind of looks elegant now, which is not something I would say for the first model. The back of this GLE Coupe is definitely the angle I'm not really sure about. Sure, you get these tail lights which kind of look okay, but I don't think the overall design works. The back looks just too small compared to the rest of the car, which is gigantic, and you get some weird sporty elements such as this spoiler here, the diffuser right here, and of course these fake vents which look ridiculous on a diesel SUV. You also get two exhausts which are not real, and the real exhausts are under the car. But that's something we definitely are getting used to in 2021. Overall, not a bad looking back of the car, but definitely not something that you would be very happy to see. Let's see how this car sounds. This GLE Coupe is the 400D, which means it has a 6-cylinder diesel engine. Now, of course, I don't have really any expectations about the sound of this, but let's still check it out. One of the big problems with a diesel on a luxury SUV such as this one is the noise it makes, because diesels are generally loud and make this awful noise. But the Mercedes GLE is so well sound isolated that you never even tell that it's a diesel. But if you open the hood like this, you can definitely hear that the diesel engine works, and there's still that noise, like a tractor. Let's check out what's under the hood of this GLE Coupe. Now this is the 400D, which means that here we have a 6-cylinder diesel engine with 330 horsepower and 700 Newton meters of torque. 0 to 60 takes 5.7 seconds and the top speed is 250 kilometers per hour. Now those are some pretty decent numbers for a car such as this, and at the same time you get a very decent fuel economy. Now I know you probably don't get this version in the States because you guys don't even know what diesel is all about, but the car is very economical and at the same time it has pretty decent dynamics. So if you're not afraid of diesels, this engine can be a very good option if you don't want to go all out and get an AMG. Another cool feature of the air suspension is the fact that you can adjust it with the touch of a button. Now here we have it in the highest setting, which actually gives the car a very decent clearance, which means you can go off-roading without any problems. And if you want to put it in the sports mode, the car will lower down to give you a better drivability. People who love bright lights and the latest technology will definitely find themselves at home at the interior of the GLE Coupe. Here you get this massive screen, which is in fact two separate screens, which has the MBUX system and the digital dials here. Although this interior is now a little bit outdated because the latest Mercedes models actually have a new screen layout, which is with one big screen right here, just like in a Tesla, and in that sense this car is not the latest Mercedes interior. But I actually prefer this shape because here you get actual physical buttons, which means for basic functions like changing your climate vent or turning up or down the volume, you can use the real knobs, which makes it just so much easier to use. Everything else here is of course very well made. You get these grab handles, which look very cool and off-roady. You get these climate vents here, which also look pretty cool and definitely do give the car some of that off-road SUV vibe. You get a beautiful Mercedes AMG steering wheel, and if you get an actual AMG model, you'll get an even better one. The only problem I have is of course with the MBUX system and the digital dials. The first time you sit in this car is just so overwhelmingly hard to use it. To reach some basic functions like changing the ambient lighting or going between the driving modes, you have to go into these menus, and they have sub-menus, and there are just millions of options. It's nothing like the simple BMW system, but when you get used to it, you see that things actually make sense, and you find that the system actually has a lot of cool graphics, some that are much better than what you get in BMW and Audi. Overall, it's a very beautiful interior, it's well made, and if it was a little bit more simple to use, I would give it the perfect score. The big news in the backseat of the GLE Coupe is of course the space. Unlike the previous generation, now the space here is actually pretty decent, and you get decent head and knee room even for tall passengers. You can even sit 3 people here because there is plenty of space, and that's not something you're used to saying about SUV coupes. But with this new generation, between this car and the regular GLE, there is almost no difference in the space in the back seats, which is a good news. Now the bad news is that here it's not very luxurious. You only get 2 climate vents, which you cannot even adjust, and there are some holes here which look very ugly, and I guess they are for the extras that this car doesn't have. The seats themselves are okay, but this vegan upholstery is pretty rough and is not very comfortable. So the Mercedes GLE is truly what the car world wants in 2021. They want an SUV, and they want it to look sporty and to have the latest technology. So in that sense, the GLE is truly a car that goes well with the times. But its engine does not, even though it's still a very relevant option. Economical, it sounds good, and it's pretty dynamic. So if you aren't afraid of diesels, go for it while you still can. And if you are, go ahead and get the petrol or the AMG. They are all amazing choices.